Welcome to Live the Dream with yours truly, Marty Kaiser. Buckle up and let's get started. Happy Friday, everyone. This is Marty Kaiser with our latest episode of Marty's Real Estate TidBits. Hope everyone is dealing with the cold weather. As I've mentioned on previous podcasts, even though I'm a transplanted northerner from right outside of the D.C. area, over the years, I just do not like this cold weather. And I've also talked about fitness before, so I try to run or power walk, and I have to force myself in this weather because it's not conducive to comfort. Anyway, could be a lot worse. A lot of parts of the country are way colder than this, and even in North Florida, I think they got about 8 inches in a couple areas of snow, which is, quite astronomical because Florida almost never gets snow. Fortunately, in Central Florida, we haven't experienced that yet, so hopefully that'll continue. A lot of interesting things are going on. Obviously, my conversations on the podcast have focused on real estate, sports, and sometimes about kind of the state of the country, which sometimes is politically oriented, sometimes is health oriented. So I will be covering a diversity of those topics today because there are some interesting things that are going on right now. I'll start off with a topic I don't usually go over as much, and that is health. There's a lot of information that's come out this past week from government studies and scientists that have put out information that a couple things are very detrimental to your long-term health. And obviously a lot of people, we're in a convenience society, so a lot of people get carry-out food on the run, things of that nature. Well, one of the things that has come out is that when you get carry-out containers and silverware and such, the ones that are specifically black coated are very detrimental because they're made with a lot of very hazardous materials into their final plastic form. So they can definitely have long-term implications on your health in a negative fashion. I won't go over the components because I'm not a scientist, but I did read it over and it was pretty concerning. It seems like whatever you eat nowadays, the government is not really protecting the consumers the way we would like, with all the processed food, even though there's a lot more emphasis on people trying to eat clean, focus on organic foods and, use places like Trader Joe's and Whole Foods and such. One of the challenges for a lot of consumers is that when you eat clean or eat healthy, it's a lot more expensive. So a lot of families that are on a tight budget and such, it's just hard for them to afford that. And then, of course, a lot of people that work, 2-family income families, and they have kids. A lot of times it's more challenging putting together a full meal. So from a convenience standpoint, a lot of processed food is prepackaged and people eat that way, or they order carry-out food. So in any event, these things are not great for you. So I'm not an alarmist, but I want my friends and family to obviously live as long as they can and minimize the incidence of inflation, inflammation and things of that nature that are correlated to a less healthy lifestyle. So I would definitely advise people to be cognizant of that stuff. If you remember anything from this podcast, don't eat carry-out containers that have black. If food comes in those type of containers, immediately take it out. And don't eat any black takeout silverware. I know a lot of the places that I've gone to in the past for carry-out, they do have black silverware for sure, and some of the places have the black containers, others don't. But anyway, enough about health. Jumping into real estate, we're now about 3 weeks into January, which is the first month in 2025. And I think everybody has mixed opinions of where we're headed in real estate. It appears that interest rates are not going to have a demonstrably reduced rate until at least mid-year. So that, I think, is going to somewhat define the market. I think the market will stay very consistent, but I think you're going to continue to see a lack of inventory in the more desirable areas. And also, you will probably not see an outpouring of buyers. You'll get the serious buyers that are A, wanting to break into the real estate market, B, are ready to relocate from other parts of the country, as Florida continues to be the number one or two destination in the United States. So we get a lot of folks that are moving down here. And C, you're still going to have a certain percentage of people, as always, that their housing needs have changed. Maybe their family's growing and they need more square footage, or the opposite is their children are grown and they want to downsize. So whatever the case may be, these dynamics will all factor into how demand and supply correlate. Personally, I think they'll stay pretty much in balance, because even though buyers are more discerning and a lot of them are still waiting for more affordability, by the same token, there's not as many sellers, and that's why inventory has been continuously lower. So that's a good reason why those things have stayed in balance. A lot of sellers increasingly, especially ones that purchased over the past 5 years, because a lot of them that bought in 2019, 20, 21, 22, and part of 23, got in at interest rates ranging between sometimes as low as 2.5% to around 3.5% or 4%. So those folks, when they look at today's interest rates, which are 7%, have a hard time justifying selling a house with a lesser interest rate and buying one with a significantly higher interest rate. So a lot of those folks are either staying pat for the time being and waiting for the interest rates to decline, as they don't have any crisis that is forcing them to move, or you're getting a certain percentage of people that instead of selling their home and buying a different home, are choosing to renovate and put updates in their home. In some cases, maybe expand the square footage a little bit with an addition. And they're more comfortable doing that from a cost-benefit analysis. So it's a continuing changing environment, and it should be interesting. Along with that, we've got a new administration. Obviously, President-elect Trump took office this week. And as you know, his methodology and opinions are far different than the previous administration. So he put out a ton of executive orders this week, and we'll see how those do. It's certainly a dramatic shift in some of the areas. For example, a lot of people that are here in the country that are not full citizens, they obviously are in different categories. Some are more blatantly here illegally than others. Others are here somewhat on an asylum basis and waiting to get before a magistrate in the U.S. But because our immigration system is so backlogged, the people that are legally here on asylum but not citizens, but on work permits, they get renewed every couple of years. They still could theoretically have some vulnerability depending on how far this redistribution of our population goes. Also, they're trying to change things to make it, right now, the way the Constitution is worded, if somebody's here illegally but they give birth to a child in the United States, the children are considered to be citizens here, and they're not here illegally. But that's one of the things that there's been a lot of talk about trying to change. A judge just ruled yesterday that he thought that was blatantly unconstitutional, but our Justice Department and the lawyers that are working for President Trump are going to appeal that. So it remains to be seen what the outcome is. That particular law was put in place in our Constitution, I think approximately 175 years ago. So it's been a long-standing law, and as long as it's in the Constitution, it's going to be hard to, try to say that those people are here incorrectly. But it should be interesting. Also in the news, what's gotten a lot of publicity, a few of President Trump's prominent people in his administration from his first term, I think it was Department of Defense, the Secretary Mike Pompeo and John Bolton, who was in the security aspect in a prominent position. They parted with President Trump at that time on probably a not so favorable basis, and they've come out publicly with some negative comments about some of the things that he's done and his method of operation and his overall understanding and knowledge of these things. He's taken great offense to that. So one of the things that he did this week was he removed their security details. The reason that these gentlemen had security details is because they were on Iran's hit list. They've been on there from what I've understood, for at least the last 4 to 5 years. The reason they were on the hit list is in the latter part of President Trump's first administration, I believe in 2020, they took out one of Iran's prominent terrorists who was, I believe, a general and very, very high ranking. And so that was pretty newsworthy. And obviously, besides President Trump, the aforementioned people I mentioned, John Bolton and Mike Pompeo, were instrumental in terms of the departments that they ran. So that was why the Iranians put out hits on all three individuals. And so President Trump has been well aware of that, and obviously his security detail was accordingly. And now, of course, he's the president, so he'll have the maximum in security. He had temporarily eliminated their security detail toward the latter months or weeks of his first administration. And then President Biden, even though he had significantly different opinions of what's the best method to govern from these two gentlemen, because they had vastly different political philosophies, did reinstitute those security provisions and details for those individuals just because of the threat level. And the threat level, according to everything that I've read and heard, still continues. So it's a scary thing if you're part of those families. I'm sure they have relatives, children, spouses, siblings, and I'm sure even if they entertain and have people visiting their house, you just never know. You could have completely innocent, unrelated individuals that get caught in the crossfire. So it was perfectly legal what President Trump has done. He has total authority on who should and shouldn't have these security details. However, it's somewhat disconcerting. I think the fear is from a lot of quarters is that people that work under his administration are going to be a lot less reticent to disagree with him or ever criticize him. So the problem with that is you're not going to get a lot of dissent, which means that if he makes some decisions that maybe are considered unusual or risky or just detrimental to our country, there's not going to be opinions within his administration that will try to argue the other side. I personally, my way that I try to manage and oversee staff personnel is that I like to have people that question me sometimes because I don't know everything, and maybe there's a point of view that I hadn't considered, and maybe somebody will come up with a good idea why a change or a policy that I was going to implement could be improved or eliminated. I don't think anybody has all the answers. We live in an increasingly complex and changing society, so it's always good to get differing viewpoints, along with somewhat differing generations even, because age is a big determinant in how people look at things. Just now with the AI revolution that we're having, it could be a great thing or it could be a horrible thing, depending on how AI is used, and that's been chatted about quite a bit over the past couple years. And there's just a lot of things like that. One of the things that concerns me personally is that a lot of the people closest to the president right now are billionaires. Elon Musk, and some of the other titans of industry that are all billionaires are having President Trump's ear and are giving him a lot of ideas from the economic perspective. And there's no question that these men are brilliant businessmen and have done a great job acquiring wealth and power. But I guess the concern is, are their policies really going to benefit the average man on the street? Or are they going to use that influence to set policies that even make them even wealthier? And of course, when you're in the billions, wealth is all relative. In my opinion, it's more of an ego and power thing. But nonetheless, to me, it's a big concern because I just don't believe that, they can relate to the average person. They don't worry about food prices. They don't worry about filling their cars with gas. A lot of them probably don't even drive. They have drivers or they take limousines or whatever the case may be. So they have a totally different perspective. It's just like people, to a much lesser degree, that fly. When you're in first class, you get treated a lot different than when you're in coach. And obviously the people in first class pay more, but they're a small minority of the passengers. And what you see in coach increasingly is the seats are smaller, there's less leg room, the food is either minimal or somewhat non-existent. With a lot of airlines, you have to pay to take a bag, to check a bag. So that's why in every plane flight that you go on, you're always seeing the gate attendants begging people to check their bags, and they won't get charged for it at the gate because everybody's trying to carry on their bags. They do it, A, to save money, and B, because our baggage system sometimes gets people nervous about their bags being, misplaced, or when you disembark from a plane. Some of the airports, like Orlando, for example, the disembarking time and getting your luggage is quite time consuming, due in large part to Orlando's baggage system being somewhat antiquated. So these are just some of the pitfalls that you could have. There's a whole litany of other dramatic changes that may take place, and we'll just have to see how those occur and what the after effects are of those. I know some of the politicians now are calling the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. There's been talk about invading Greenland, some kind of extreme philosophies. And it's not so much whether you think that there needs to be some changes maybe in certain of those areas, but when you speak in a unilateral power tone like the last part of rhetoric that's coming out, Unfortunately, it does make us sound like we're an oligarchy or a dictatorship, because dictators are the ones that don't follow precedent, don't follow the will of the people, and make unilateral decisions that they feel is what they want to do without regard to the majority or the consequences. And if you have a situation where a small minority is ruling the country, that's just not a good situation. And it's certainly against the principles that our country was founded for, of democracy. Increasingly, these are some of the reasons why our country is so splintered. As I've mentioned previously, we need to get back to the middle. I think both parties have significant weaknesses, do not speak for the majority of the people, and they've been in large measure to all the stress that people have, the health problems, the anxiety, the increase in shootings. Just a lot of negative consequences have occurred from this huge adversarial society that we're in. So those are just some things that I think people need to think about, and they need to stay informed. Real estate-wise, as I mentioned, it's kind of a mixed bag. For me personally, the first 3 weeks of January have been pretty steady. What I've noticed with my personal business, I deal with a lot of out-of-the-area customers that are planning on moving here. And so they are definitely a lot more what I would consider pragmatic about the move, and they gather a lot more information. And they're a lot slower to make a big move, because not only are they more cautious, but I think they're not as comfortable with the future of different things as it relates to different states, different real estate projections and the like. I know when I moved to Florida many years ago, and I moved from the D.C., Maryland area, as I mentioned, I did a survey of a lot of parts of the country and narrowed down where I thought would be a good place for myself and my family to live. And what I looked at was, for me, climate was a real important thing, and obviously I love the warmer weather, generally speaking, we have in Florida. I looked at economic opportunity, because I've always been more of an entrepreneur personality. So where would a place be more, a little easier to crack into, which I ultimately did in the real estate business, as I've owned and sold several different real estate operations. I looked at housing prices, and when I moved to the Central Florida area, housing prices were probably in the lower 40% of the country. And that has changed. They've increased significantly, which has been good and bad. It's been good if you owned a house when the prices were moderate and you were the beneficiary of these huge increases, especially over the past few years. On the flip side, if you were a first-time buyer, the news was not good, because it was definitely harder to buy your first home, and wages have not kept up with the prices of real estate. So those are some of the things I looked at. I also looked at education and kind of how the state of Florida operated. So the one thing I understood when I moved here, and really hasn't changed that much, is education was lacking in Florida in most areas. There's always outliers, like you'll always find a good school district or a good school. But if you looked at Florida in a whole, and Central Florida, which is where I settled, the overall education simply was not as good. You know, when you look at the barometers that people look to compare, both the standardized tests that students use, along with the SAT scores, the percentage of high school graduates, the percentage of people from our high schools that attended universities. All those things were in the lower third of the country. They've probably improved marginally, but there's still a lot of areas that need improvement. And some of the reasons for that are the schools are not funded as well here as some states. The teachers' compensation is below a lot of the states in the country. So a lot of times teachers, they don't feel they can afford to teach. So they get into other occupations. Plus, teachers here sometimes pay a lot of their own money for supplies because a lot of the schools, they just don't have the budget to adequately supply the classrooms, especially for the students that, have an affordability issue. So education's an area that, I wish would improve, but, it's kind of plateaued. The information over the last couple of years, our schools had declined relative to the United States. So I think we're like in really the bottom 10% right now of the United States in terms of the education our public school kids are getting. That's why increasingly more people are opting for private schools. The challenge with private schools are you have two types of private schools, basically. You have the ones that are very well regarded, of which Orlando has a few, like Lake Highland and Trinity Prep and a few others, but they're quite expensive. They're like sending your kids to college. So a lot of families, that's not an option. Then you have a whole batch of other private schools that are more based on a little different criteria. They're the ones that are involved more in the voucher system. And you have a mixed bag. Some of those are doing a good job, but others, when you read about them, are kind of horror stories. The teachers are not as qualified. A lot of times the teachers are not as educated. Some of the personnel there is not as vetted. So you hear some unusual stories about behavior that you wouldn't want associated with your children. And they try to, get nonprofit statuses. There's been a person in the news recently, a local politician, Amnesty, and she's done a lot of things that she have been severely looked into, and she's going through the legal system now for a lot of activity that doesn't look like it was conducted the way it should have been. And so things of that nature. Also, there's kind of selective enforcement. A lot of schools, both public and private, have reduced the amount of books that their students can read because there's been a lot of censoring of reading material. In many cases, the books were mainstays of our education system for the last 50, 100 years, and would be hard-pressed to say that they were extreme positions. So those are just some of the things that are a concern to me. And last but not least is, I think we've had, from my perspective anyway, a lot of our elected officials that interact that could affect my family in Central Florida or the state of Florida, I haven't been overly impressed with. They just have kind of a very not narrow focus on what they want to accomplish. Some of their personal behavior is questionable. And one thing about our political system, which I think is a problem, increasingly incumbents are much harder to defeat. So even if you have an incumbent that is not doing a particularly good job, they just have so many built-in advantages with fundraising, name recognition, that power base, the political party behind them. the amount of incumbents that lose is very small compared to the amount of incumbents that win. So a lot of times a politician that has arguably not done a very good job stays in office for many years. So those are just some of the things that I found, in my decision making and how I look at living in the state. So it also affects people that are moving down here. And obviously the better that our state is regarded, the better we're going to get in terms of the type of individuals and the people that contribute to make our state a great state. Last but not least is sports. A couple things that are occurring right now. The biggest thing is the National Football League's playoffs. We're now at championship weekend. So in the NFC, we have the Washington Commanders playing the Philadelphia Eagles. The Washington Commanders were a team that nobody expected to be this way. They've been led by their rookie sensation, Jalen Daniels. They systematically dismantled the Detroit Lions last week, scored 45 points on them. And I believe in that game they never had a punt. Their offense just was awesome. So it's going to be interesting, their game against Philadelphia. Philadelphia is the favorite, and they are playing at home. And they have the record-breaking running back Saquon Barkley, who's played phenomenally. But the Commanders, up to this point, have found a way to get it done. So it should be a really entertaining and hopefully interesting game. In the AFC, we have the Kansas City Chiefs, who have won the Super Bowl the last 2 years, going for a record-breaking third consecutive Super Bowl. They're playing against the Buffalo Bills. The Bills have played the Chiefs previously. In fact, they beat them earlier this year in the Chiefs' one of two regular season losses. And they're led by their outstanding quarterback, Josh Allen. But they haven't been able to get over the hump in the games that matter in the playoffs and beat the Chiefs to go to the Super Bowl. The Chiefs, of course, are led by the all-star quarterback, Patrick Mahomes, who continues to he just wins. Whatever it takes, he's able to accomplish that. And they have an all-time great coach in Andy Reid. So those should be two great games, and they're both scheduled to play this coming Sunday. We're taping this show as of Friday, and it will appear on all our outlets later this afternoon. In NBA basketball, it continues to be kind of the haves and the have-nots. The haves have tremendous records this year, especially the Cleveland Cavaliers and the Oklahoma City Thunder. And then there's a lot of really bad teams in the NBA. So it's the drama for a lot of teams is already over. A lot of teams are out of the race already. The local team, the Orlando Magic, started off the year great. And they have a young, what I would call a pretty talented group of players. However, they suffered overwhelming injuries this year, and it's finally caught up to them. They're playing horribly right now. Some of their better players are just starting to come back, but it's a combination. I think they overperformed when they were decimated, and the players that just came back are still a little rusty. So their record has dropped to what they call the 500 level, which means they've lost as many games as they've won. In the last 3 or 4 games, they've gotten blown out, so to speak, meaning that they've lost by like 20 or 30 points a game. So we'll have to see if they can turn it around. I'm sure they're waiting for the All-Star break to get everybody fully healed and back into their system. Last night's game was a home game at the Orlando Arena, and they played the Portland Trail Blazers, who are not a very good team. And Portland beat them by almost 30 points. So that was arguably the Magic's worst performance of the year. So anyway, that gives you a little bit of diversity on some of the topics we mentioned. Again, I hope everyone's doing well. Stay warm and healthy. Enjoy the football games this week. Please tell your friends and family about our show. We'd love to continue to increase our listenership. I can be reached at marty@floridasells.com. And that's all for today. Have a great weekend. Marty Kaiser out.